I remember after sitting up after the ultrasound, I'm crying there, and he puts his hand in my hand. He took the time to just grab my eye contact and just tell us how sorry he was. And I started weeping right then and there because he was so kind. Like, I'm tearing up thinking about it now. He was so kind in the midst of all of our sorrow.
Our TFMR stories. I'm Sabrina, the TFMR pregnancy loss doula, and today Kelsie shares her story of how she terminated her planned and wanted pregnancy after a diagnosis of hydrocephalus and severe spina bifida. Here's Kelsie.
So yeah, my name's Kelsie. I'm from Idaho. Actually, I'm from Florida, but I moved to Idaho when I was a young adult. I finished college up here. I met my husband up here. My husband has two kids from a prior marriage. He's older. He's 9 years older than me. I'm going to be 30 this month. But at the time, I was 27.
Okay.
I think I was 27 or 28. We knew, like, as soon as we got married, we knew we wanted to start a family rather quickly. I had known that there were studies out there where it shows that, like, the older that the dads are, the more possibilities for problems with a baby. So we started trying. We got married in October of 2017. We tried to get pregnant on our honeymoon. It didn't happen, but it didn't take very long to get pregnant. I hadn't always wanted kids growing up, but it started kind of changing after watching my husband be a father. February, it was before my period, but we found out about a pregnancy. I had been hiking a lot and snowshoeing a lot in Idaho. We live in the mountains, a very rural area in Idaho. So my husband found out that I went snowshoeing, and he's like, "Oh, I want to go with you." And so I was like, "Okay, great." But that day I felt like extremely tired, like fatigued, just didn't. I wanted to go, but I didn't. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. I'm like so tired. I just want to sleep for 20 hours. But I remember on that hike, I'm thinking, maybe I'm pregnant. So I kind of mentioned my suspicions to him, and he's like, "Oh, you're not pregnant. That's not possible. It's not that quick. It doesn't happen that quickly." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever." I got a test, and that's when I found out I was pregnant. So I don't really have any special memories of that pregnancy. I just remember being scared shitless. I guess most people feel excited about pregnancy, but when I saw those two lines, I remember feeling just scared, and I didn't feel good about it. You know how people are like in the commercials, you hear people be like, "Okay, this is exciting." I didn't feel that excitement. It was just more like, "All right, here we go." I feel like that might have been like maybe my subconscious way of protecting myself, like knowing there was something wrong even then. Because with my rainbow pregnancy, I didn't feel like that at all. It was specifically this pregnancy, and I remember seeking counseling for the feelings I had been experiencing, because I felt like something was deeply wrong with me, that I wasn't excited.
Yeah, and then looking back, you realize that intuition was that feeling.
Right. And at the time, I guess by the time I found out I was pregnant, it was a couple days before my period, but I think for our son's diagnosis, that it was already too late. Like, there was, like, what had happened, the neural tube had closed, and there was no, like, fixing it.
And then your fears were true. So you got a diagnosis at some point. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the pregnancy went fairly smoothly, typical first trimester crap. I remember I was so nauseous and I was vomiting a lot. It was really bad, and my doctor put me on Zofran, and it wasn't really helping. So she kind of kept a close eye on me. I have a history of depression. My family, I lost my parents to suicide when I was very young, my mom when I was 2, and my dad when I was 13. So I've battled with depression on and off my life, and that was a big concern for me. was, again, my feeling negative towards the pregnancy. She kept reassuring me that at some point it's just going to click. And at some point, if I start to get really concerned, call her day or night. So she had already been kind of keeping a close eye on me, both for my mental state and my, hormones are so out of whack. And I know that's what contributed a lot to my negative feelings. Where I live, it's super rural, so they don't do like the anatomy scan in the clinic. So we had our anatomy scan at the hospital, and it was so ironic too, because like a couple of nights before, I was reading a book about pregnancy, and it was talking about anatomy scans, and it was saying stuff about spina bifida, and I saw that word. And again, it didn't mean anything to me, but I'm like, I rolled my eyes. I'm like, I don't need to read this. This is for, mothers 35 and old. I was so confident that it wasn't like nothing was going to hit me. It was a very rude awakening. We went to the hospital for anatomy scan. My stepkids came along. They were very excited, that we were adding to our family. They remember we all agreed we didn't want to know the sex. Like, we wanted to do a surprise gender reveal. And we met with the ultrasound tech. She was doing her thing, but she was having trouble. She said she was having trouble getting the picture she wanted. Now I know that wasn't the case. She was trying to get clear pictures without raising any eyebrows. Even this was my husband's third time, doing it. And for him, he didn't notice anything, so she was very good at what she did. I would never have guessed that something was wrong. It took about an hour, and I think that's typically how long they last anyway, maybe a little longer. She had me get up and walk and roll and go to the bathroom and do all of that. She only gave me like 1 or 2 pictures, which I thought was kind of odd, but I didn't say anything. And I was at work at a special meeting. It wasn't a normal work day for me, and I got a call from my doctor. So I called her back. I left a message. And I called my husband freaking out. I'm like, she called me, she left a message, she said she needs to talk to me, like something's wrong. My husband's like, oh no, it's not. I'm like, Dan, something's wrong. A doctor doesn't call, especially when you're gonna have a follow-up appointment for that ultrasound to go over the results, when everything is hunky-dory. She would not do this. As I'm talking to him, she calls back. She's like, I'm sorry to tell you this, but from the initial scans, it looks like your baby has water on the brain. And I'm like, okay, what is that? She's like, well, that's hydrocephalus. And she's like, we don't have very clear pictures here, but it's concerning. And she's like, she's like, that's usually indicative of spina bifida. She's like, we don't even know if he has spina bifida, but that's usually what this type of, like with the fluid on the brain and the amount that they're seeing, that's normally what they say it is usually the cause. She's like, so I'm referring you to maternal fetal medicine 2.5 hours away. And, she kept saying, I'm so sorry. And I just remember kind of being just so blown away. I go back into my meeting and I'm crying. I stayed there. And then after our meeting, my boss, she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I just told her, I'm like, there's something wrong with our baby. And this is where it got annoying, because I didn't want to hear positive stories. But she goes, well, it's okay. I remember that they said something about my son, and he was a tiny bit delayed, but he's just fine now. And I know what she was trying to get at, to try to make me feel better, but it didn't. Mm-hmm. And it made me almost feel worse, because you want to hope for the best, but you're also preparing for the worst. And I expected the worst. So that's kind of how I found out. And ironically, if you go back in time just a little bit, we also did the genetic testing.
Okay.
The NIP test, the 12 and 13 week, and everything came back clear. We had low odds, and like my husband and I thought we were in the clear. But they even do like a little scan there too. I guess that's the nuchal flow, where a lot of people find out that their baby has T13 or T18 or T21. Everything looked normal, I guess, to the ultrasound tech. But I remember, and it stands out so clear in my mind, my husband and I afterwards, we went to P.F. Chang's, and I remember looking at it, I'm like, at the head, and I'm like, something doesn't look right with the head. And I showed it to my husband, And he's like, yeah, he's like, I wasn't going to say anything, but I don't recall like Jacob or Christine looking like this, his kids, at their 13 week or 12 week. And I don't know, maybe it just means he has a big head or something. I remember thinking then that something didn't look right. And I even pulled pictures online of other normal ultrasound pictures at that stage of gestation, and it didn't look anything like my son. So I kind of hold a little bit of anger towards them, because if something didn't look right to the untrained eye, shouldn't something not look right to the trained eye? So that's kind of how we found out our initial diagnosis. We got into maternal fetal medicine a day and a half later, and it was like torture waiting for that appointment. I didn't go to work. I in bed, and then when I wasn't in bed, I was sitting outside on the porch just praying and crying and like asking for best case scenario, like just you know I just want, I could deal with a handicapped child, just not a severe handicapped child, I can deal with that, I'll do whatever it takes, begging God, like, just, take my house, take everything, like, just make my child healthy. So it was really hard. And I know my husband, I did a lot of research on it. He did a ton of research on it, like way more than I think I could have. And then that Thursday, it was a Thursday, we went to maternal fetal medicine after a night of no sleeping. And it was just, it was brutal. They knew why we were there. They did the scan. They were very open, unlike the other ultrasound tech, about what they were going over. They're like, okay, well, we're going to go over the heart. Okay, that's asinine. Like, that's not what's wrong with my kid. Not the heart, but they're like, oh, his heart looks great. And I'm like, oh, great, his heart looks great, but what else is wrong with him? And then that's when they started pointing out, okay, so this is what we normally like to see, and he's got a lot of fluid in his brain. They're showing all the fluid to me and my husband. And my husband doesn't cry. He's cried at that point, he's only cried one other time since we've been together, and it was on our wedding day. So he just broke down right then and there. I knew we were getting like the worst hand dealt to us. And then the doctor comes in and he talks to us. Yeah, he was just telling us, this is what we're seeing. It starts at the L4, the lumbar 4, the opening, and it goes all the way down to the S4, S5 or something, which is a pretty significant part of the spine. He's like, your child's never going to walk. He's never going to walk. And at that point, we knew, like, they were telling us the gender of or the sex of our baby too. So we knew we were having a boy at that point. Kids with these lives can kind of have somewhat normal lives, but it is very complicated. So he's never going to walk. He's going to always have to have a catheter in when he's older, because he's not going to have any control down, to urinate for himself. He's going to have like a colostomy bag, because he's not going to be able to, he's not going to be able to poop for himself, and he's like, and then on top of that, what we're seeing is, because of such a wide opening, his brainstem is being pulled into his spine from the opening, and it's not going to stop until he comes out of there and we do surgery to repair it. The moment he's born, you're going to have to go into labor and delivery at 34 weeks. You're going to have to go down to Utah to have this done, because that's where they do pretty significant surgeries down there, life-saving surgeries. We just don't have that kind of medical care up here. And he'll immediately have to go in to get that tube closed, and he'll have to get a shunt placed to drain the fluid in his brain. That's if you make it to 34 weeks. And I'm like, well, what do you mean if I make it? And he's like, well, with these kinds of cases, a lot of times people go into labor prematurely and they lose the baby. And then he's like, that's also if you decide to carry until 34 weeks. And I'm like, oh, so is it an option to abort? And he said, yes. And he's like, in my professional recommendation, if I were you, I would. And it wasn't like he was trying to steer us that direction. He was just saying, like, this is an option for you if you need it. So he also was saying, and we knew it was bad with the brainstem being pulled into the spine. He said, your kid will be lucky if he could ever swallow. Like, he would probably need a feeding tube. And to us, that was like, what kind of life is that for our son? Like, we knew, and my husband and I made the decision before we even left. we would terminate the pregnancy if it was worst case scenario. So I think that was why my husband was losing it the way he did, because he knew it was worst case scenario. And what kind of life is that for really? Like, why would, if I've told my husband, if I end up in a car crash and I'm basically brain dead in a coma, is that a life I want to live on a ventilator? Like on a ventilator, life support? Or would I, because we are Christian, would I rather just say goodbye, I'll see you later, and be at peace in heaven, not in any pain? Like I would not want a life like that. So how could I ever do that to my son? So I asked, okay, well, can we abort here? He's like, well, there's two options. You could do a D&E or you could do labor and delivery. He's like, I'm going to be honest with you. Our doctors here will not, and our staff will not support labor and delivery if you decide to terminate. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, he's like, I fully would support you, but I would not necessarily be the one doing your labor and delivery. It would be a separate staff on the labor and delivery floor, and they are very pro-life. And I do not feel you would get the treatment that you deserve for your son and for yourself. And I just, I look at my husband and I'm like, how could medical professional be like that? So he had to refer us out of state. And in my state, we were past the stage where we could do an abortion in state.
It wouldn't have been legally available to you anyway.
So right. Well, it would for a labor and delivery, not for a D&E.
Oh, okay.
So, and I think I would have had to travel, from what I understand, I would have to travel out of state for the shot and then come back, and then they could do the labor and delivery in state. But I would have to travel out of state for a D&E. We were past that stage. I think I was 21 weeks at that point. And he was like the kindest, besides my primary care, was the kindest medical professional we dealt with that whole process. And he wrote, because he's like, I'm being encouraged to not do this. So I'm going so that your insurance does this, like, because I'm sure your insurance will have a hard time covering this. I'm going to be very blatantly honest. I'm going to write dismal prognosis, all of the stuff. So in the hopes that your insurance will cover for the procedure. And I cannot be more thankful for him. Yeah, I mean, we needed to know what it was, and he dealt us. And I remember sitting up after the ultrasound, I'm crying there, and he puts his hand in my hand, and he like he took the time to just grab my eye contact and just tell us how sorry he was. And I started weeping right then and there because he was so kind. Like, I'm tearing up thinking about it now. He was so kind in the midst of all of our sorrow. And he said, whatever you guys decide, we're going to support you either way. So, like I said, he wasn't encouraging us to abort.
Right.
But he wasn't encouraging us to continue the pregnancy either. It was just kind of your decision. These are options for you if you want them.
Yes.
And you need to make the decision based off of what's best for your family. So that's kind of how we found out everything. It's very long-winded. Sorry to people who are listening. But people deserve to know what it's like.
Yeah, it's all part of the story. I'm glad that he was compassionate with you.
Yeah, I am too. It was needed. It was so needed. Yeah, I know not a lot of people get that. So, I know we just left that day. It was the worst feeling you could ever have. So, yeah, he was very compassionate.
Yeah, it's like the worst news of your life.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was absolutely awful. And I remember questioning, I was pretty mad at God too. I was like, why? I've lost my parents, now I have to lose my son. Like, come on. It was hard. It was really hard.
Yeah, that spiritual part of the process. It's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. You said you were praying a lot, and then the anger and so much. Can you tell us a little more?
Yeah. I'm Christian. I mentioned that. My husband is a Christian. He was very pro-life before this. In my younger years, I was very pro-life. And then I realized even before this whole situation came up, I realized that there's circumstances out there that aren't fair for me to judge others,
Uh-huh.
you know, and that's their choice, and it's none of their business. It's none of my business. I don't, I can be pro-life, but that doesn't mean anything. That has no effect on you. Like, that my belief should have no effect on you and your medical care and your child. And I know you're asking about the spiritual. It ties in. I promise it ties in. He struggled, with that, with saying like, okay, we're going to terminate our pregnancy. I'm pro-life. God teaches me thou shalt not kill, all of that. And he finally came to a point of acceptance. And I just remember being so angry at God. Just being like, why is this happening again? Like, why am I losing someone that I love again? He delved into his prayers, whereas I don't want to say turn my back on God, but I just was angry at that point, and I couldn't pray. And if I did pray, it was like for a miracle, and I knew a miracle wasn't going to happen. I mean, I prayed for it, and I hoped against all hope that it was going to happen, but we live in the real world, and those kinds of miracles that they put on those movies and stuff, they just don't happen every day. I view miracles as not like that, but I view miracles as something different. I think it's a miracle that I wake up every morning, I think it's a miracle that, somehow after every winter we get a beautiful spring and a beautiful summer. Like, those are my versions of miracles. It's not your typical, you wake up one day and you're healed. We were actually at the hotel. We had to travel to Oregon, and it was the night before our procedure. And I remember, but we had already gotten the shot to stop his heart. It was really, really hard. I was having a really hard time with that. I started researching children in the Bible, specifically the New Testament. I started researching, and I was finding all of these scripture verses where children are the most embraced in heaven, and they're the most precious, and that Jesus teaches us to have faith as small as a mustard seed, or faith that of as an innocent child. I started feeling peace about it. It's not complete peace, but peace that, like, not necessarily that we had made the right decision, but peace that he was going to be at peace. And I just remember starting to read them out loud to my husband, and we kind of just sat there on the bed and crying. That's kind of what helped me initially. And then we got home after everything, and my husband was reading a lot of the Bible again, and he was talking, just about the spiritual side of it. And I still wasn't ready to go to church or anything, but he was the one that helped me understand that it was not God's fault for it happening. Let's see, so it wasn't God's fault for it happening. It was more of a, how to explain it? He said it was like a result. So it's a result of the sin of the world. When Eve took that first bite of the apple and then gave it to Adam, that caused sin to be introduced into our world. And it wasn't like God chose us to be like, your kid's going to have spina bifida, because God is an all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect human being, or perfect being, right? Or he's supposed to be. And the same thing with Jesus. He's supposed to be like perfect, and we're supposed to be made in his image. So what happened to our son was just pure chance, and it's a result of sin in the world, and not because of any sin I had committed, because of any sin that Dan committed, but just because of sin in the world. And we're just one of those many couples that had that shitty hand dealt to us. So the way he explained that to me, it actually really helped me in my healing. You always hear these stupid phrases from people like, things happen for a reason, or God doesn't give you what is it? God doesn't give you what you can't handle. Like, all of that bullshit stuff that's meant to make you feel better, but it doesn't. And especially at the time. And I'm guilty of saying that too. So the way he said that just made so much more sense than any of that ever could. because the God that I know is loving and compassionate and caring, and he is what a father figure should be, and he doesn't want to cause pain, and doesn't want to cause suffering. And so why would he do that to the most innocent? Sin itself can do that, but not the God that I know. So like you said, a lot of spiritual is just not spoken about. But I know my husband was the one who really, because if it weren't for him, I probably would have turned my back on God again. After I lost my dad, I turned my back on God. I'm like, you did this to me, and people gave me those bullshit excuses like things happen for a reason, and that's, oh God, people could get me fired up with that stuff.
The platitudes.
So that's really what helped me. So knowing that the children are the most cherished in heaven, that my son was going to have a perfect body in heaven, and that that he wouldn't have had here, that God wasn't doing this to punish me, and in fact he didn't do it at all to begin with. And I hope someone can hear that and understand that. But I've heard people say it in other groups where they say something like, well, he must be punishing you for something you did in a past life, or he must be punishing you for an earlier action or something. That's not the case. Shit happens to everyone, and it may seem like everyone has a perfect life, but everyone has gone through something in their life. That's just because we live in a broken world. So, yeah, so that was my spiritual aspect of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because everybody's spiritual journey is very personal, and that was your personal journey. Yeah, and this idea of the divine as being the most compassionate energy. Yeah, so that part of your journey, remembering that we did this for a compassionate reason, and if my God is a compassionate God, then that's what I have to remember.
Right. And I know not everyone listening is a Christian, or maybe they're questioning their own faith as a Christian. And there is nothing wrong with that. And I'm not going to be the one that says, you're believing the wrong thing. Like, that's not my role as a Christian. My role as a Christian is to be loving and caring and compassionate, and to love my neighbor as I would myself. Whatever kind of spiritual healing you need, or, spiritual journey you have, regardless of what you believe in, I say lean into that faith. If you don't have a faith, that's okay too. But I encourage it, just because it was so helpful, not just with Christianity, whatever it is that you're kind of leaning towards, your beliefs, lean into that and see what's right for you and what you're going through.
Yeah, that was definitely the process that I had to go through, because my spirituality is more pagan, earth-based, and I was very angry at the earth. I was angry at Mother Nature. How did you do this to me? Why did you? What is this mistake?
Right.
So even though they're different faith traditions or different spiritual beliefs,
it's still the same process. You had a lot of anger. I had a lot of anger. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelsie.
Yeah.
So let's go back just a little bit. You were sent out of state.
Yes. I was 21 weeks, I think, a little over 21 weeks. My memory gets so twisted during this time. I was just so wrapped in my grief. I was between 21 and 23 weeks. I know I was before that 24-week cutoff. We were sent out of state. My in-laws were just as devastated. My whole family was just as devastated for us. And my in-laws, they gifted us money to be able to fly out of Idaho to go to Oregon, because we had to go to Portland, and from where we're at, it was like a 13-hour drive. That was something I remember talking to her about. Was like, I don't want to sit in a car bleeding after this traumatic procedure. Like, I don't, like, for 14 hours, I don't want to do that. I just want to come home and grieve. So they were very kind and paid for tickets, which were not cheap. We're not in COVID situation here, you know, and it was expensive, but, you know, they gave it to us because they felt like that's all they could do for us and their grandchild.
Oh.
It took about a week to go there because I had to schedule the appointment and they were about
Okay.
a week out.
So you had to
So
wait.
and I'm sure everyone and their mom on here can identify with that waiting period. It is the worst. I think that's even worse than waiting for that diagnosis because you're in this waiting period. You're sentencing your child to die. Like whether they have a terminal or not, it is that the worst moment. You know, I don't know how I got through it. I don't know how anyone gets through it. I really don't, because I was just in so much pain emotionally and mentally. I remember I wasn't bonding with the pregnancy, and I spent that last week trying to bond. Um, it's still really hard to talk about.
Yeah, it's okay.
Because there's this layer of guilt. I just remember sitting out on the front porch and hugging, my stomach and saying, "I'm sorry. I don't want to do this. I'm sorry for giving you a broken body." It was really hard, just that waiting period. It was terrible. So I was trying to bond with him as much as possible. Holding my stomach, cherishing his kicks, all of that. So my husband was looking at stories. We were looking for stories, not positive stories. He was trying to look for real stories. But he stumbled upon a blog, and it was just so helpful because it was the one story where it was not a happy-go-lucky life. So they decided to have their child with spina bifida. The dad was the blogger because the mom decided she couldn't handle a kid with a disability. Like, it was just too much. And she left. She left them. And multiple kids, and the one kid had this disability. And he said life sucked. He was in his preteen years, and every morning you would hear his kid wake up and curse God for making him the way he was. He was like constantly peeing all over the house because he had no control over it. So his house always smelled like urine, and his sibling would never have friends over because he was embarrassed at the state of his house. And the dad was like, the brother with spina bifida would never get invited anywhere to any birthday parties, and they made fun of him and they called him diaper boy, and like he hated his life. And he said, if I could go back and change things, I probably would have encouraged my wife to have an abortion. And he's like, that's not saying I don't love my child. That's not saying I don't care for him, and I'm going to try to give him the best life I can right now. But my kid, I'm failing as his parent because he hates his life right now. And he said he had to get him counseling because the kid was contemplating suicide. Like, that was not a kind of life we wanted for him. Yeah, so we were looking at research studies as well about how kids with disabilities affect multi-kid families. Research studies, they weren't good. The finances were always tight for families like that. The kid with the disability is the one that takes over the primary focus, and the other two kids, or the other kids get the shaft, essentially. All the money and the resources go to the disabled kids, so that means that our kids wouldn't be able to do sports and go on camping trips or go on vacations, and the emotional well-being of them. How would they feel if a disabled kid was the primary? They would adapt, sure, but I'm sure that they would struggle they need attention too. They're growing too. Everything we looked at just wasn't good, and we purposely wanted to see that stuff because it was an eye-opener. We didn't want the happy-go-lucky, all unicorn and rainbow stories, but we're in families that are struggling with the brain everyday life. They're not blogging about it. They're not talking about it because it's hard. And they
don't have time. They don't have time to blog about it.
Exactly. They don't have time. Or if they do find the time somehow, why would they want to blog about something so negative? You know?
Yeah, it's so gray. So
yeah.
There's so many factors. Thank you for sharing all of those different factors.
Yeah, so the main question was, we had to go out of state. Yes, we went out of state. We flew to Oregon. We flew to Portland. It was a 2-day procedure. We had booked our flight back already. We flew in late. The next day, we went to this clinic. It was called Lovejoy Clinic. And because it was on Lovejoy Street, but I thought it was such a stupid name for how I was feeling. My primary care doctor actually heard good things about this place because someone she went to school with, her roommate in medical school, worked there. But unfortunately, at the time I went, she was on vacation.
Oh.
So it made it hard. The first day was an all-day thing. We got there in the morning. I didn't know what to expect. And I wish I did know what to expect. It would have been a lot better. But there's specialty children's hospital there, and my husband was like, maybe we should go there. And I'm like, we don't have the time. We have to get our flight back. And in a way, I kind of wish we had gone there to get a second opinion, but we were so close on time, you know, and we were rushed. And I hate that. I hate that because that timeline is a huge difference, and it sucks.
Yes.
Yeah, so anyway, my husband was crying on and off. I was crying on and off. We switched roles. I was his rock. He was my rock. We had to fill out paperwork. We had to get the counseling. They had to do the ultrasound again, but they wouldn't let me look at it, even though I asked to look at it. Because they had to do the measuring for the laminaria placement and everything. And I wish that they had.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish that they had let me. That was out of my control, but we got the counseling. Like, okay, you understand by what you're doing here. You're aborting your pregnancy and yada yada yada, all the pro-life bullshit that they're forced to do. They did treat us good. We didn't have to sit in the waiting room with the other women. Okay. We were kind of whisked away to a private conference room, and people kept coming in to talk to us there.
Okay.
So they knew our circumstances, that it was a wanted pregnancy.
Okay. So they treated you as such.
Yes. Yep.
And that made all the difference.
Yeah, at least the staff. The doctor was a little bit different, and I'll explain that here in a minute. But the normal staff there, like the receptionist and the counselor, all of that, they treated us as such. They knew it was a difficult decision. That was where sorry.
Okay. It's okay. Do you want to take a minute?
No, it's okay. It's okay. People need to see it's still painful a couple of years later. That's where I asked for foot. They're like, is there anything we could do for you? And I'm like, yes, if possible. I would like to get his handprints and his footprints. Yeah. They had something special there. Excuse me. So they had something special there. They had a special deal there for people for families in our situation, where they worked with a funeral home nearby, and it was a flat cremation fee, where they would do the cremation not in a lump with a bunch of other babies, or like some hospitals do. He would get his own cremation, and they would send his remains back to us. It was a $75 fee. I actually just went through the paperwork the other day. We were going through our paperwork, and
wow.
That was there. So anyway, it was a $75 fee. We were grateful for that. The funeral home, later we spoke to them, because I had to give them all of our information. He was the whole trip, he was the kindest person we had dealt with. I never met him, but over the phone, he was really kind. I remember that. So that was the day where I wasn't expecting it, but it was all day. We did all the paperwork and stuff, and we had to sign over a bunch of stuff. We went upstairs, and the doctor came in, and we asked her, because we had heard she was like a specialist at this children's hospital. This was her like volunteer job of all things. She worked with cases like that our son had. We asked her, where, you know, we said, what is your experience with dealing with kids with our son's diagnosis? And she was so mean. She's like, well, I can't give you anything official, and I could tell you that parents, you know, they make it work if they want to make it work. Like, it was just, she was really mean about it. And, you know, she's like, well, I could get you a referral. It'll probably be at the end of the week, but I could get you in so you could get a real second opinion about this. And I'm like, no, you know, we're on a timeline. You can see we're on a timeline here. She was so mean. You know, and I get maybe you have to be cold, but I guess, you know, our situation was different. You know, it was a wanted pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And not to single out those who don't want their pregnancies and go get an abortion for unwanted pregnancy, but it's a different grief process.
Yeah.
Yeah, even my husband was like, yeah, she was a bitch.
So wait,
she was.
So this was all the first day?
This was all the first day.
So
yeah,
the first day there was counseling, paperwork, and that was it? And then you had to come back the next day and then they would do the laminaria?
Well,
or was there a waiting
was
period?
all that stuff, the ultrasound. Yeah, so sort of. There was no waiting period. It was all of the stuff, the counseling, the paperwork, the laminaria placement, and then the shot to stop his heart.
Oh, that all happened on the same day. Okay.
No one had told me to expect the shot, and my husband later said, well, I kind of knew it was going to happen, and I'm like, why didn't you tell me? Like, I wish you had told me, because I didn't know that was that day. He told me because of how far along I was that it might be a 2-day laminaria placement, depending on how I did it. And I told him that wasn't an option. Like, we had our flight to go back because I was told it was only like a 2-day process. The laminaria, the 1 day, and then the next day, the procedure. So the first up was the shot. And I wasn't, even as they gave it to me, I don't think I fully processed what it was until they gave it to me. And I don't know if that was a lack of them telling me what it was or what, but they put it in my stomach. And that was like the point of no return at that point. You know, we got the shot, like, we can't go back.
Yeah.
And the moment that happened, my husband was holding my hand in that room, and he lost it, like, just wept. You know, he turned his head away from me and he just started weeping, which made me weep. And it was painful. Like, the shot was painful, I'm not gonna lie. They give you like an anesthetic. The emotional pain from that was far worse than anything physical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I had nightmares about it for a while. Yeah. Even now, I sometimes still have nightmares about that. Yeah. So, I mean, even the lady, she wasn't like, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to do that. Like, she was very cold, didn't say a word. It was, yeah, so then they did the laminaria, which was a little bit painful, but it wasn't too bad. Like, I could deal with it, especially after what I just did. I'm like, give me it. So, like, that pain was nothing. It was nothing compared to the emotional pain I was in. So they gave me, I think, 6 laminarias. And then they're like, okay, well, we're going to let that do its job. I need you to take this pill tomorrow morning at this time, and then take another pill, the misoprostol, I think is what it's called, my whatever, to help dilate you further. and we'll see you tomorrow. Oh, and they gave me a prescription for hydrocodone and acetaminophen,
Okay.
like stuff like that. We left there. We're both shocked and done. And we go to this Walgreens, and the lady could tell I was pregnant. She's like, I gotta warn you, obviously you're pregnant, so taking this could have severe side effects. And I'm just like, whatever. Like, I didn't even pick it up. My husband went in and picked it up for me. I just dropped the prescription off.
Mm.
And I'm just like, I know they're doing their job, but it was like, to me, it was like, yeah, whatever. It's pointless. So, like, and they told me too that the shot would probably take several hours. It wasn't instant. So we went by the river there, and we just sat there, and my husband kept putting his hand on my stomach just to feel his son kick a few more times. And he whispered, I love you. I'm so sorry. Stuff like that. That's where he prayed. I kind of prayed, sort of. I guess I was just so angry and numb at that point. He was still kind of kicking at that point. I remember feeling his kicks and just trying to cherish him. And then it was like maybe 10 o'clock that night. I think I may have felt his last kick. And I kind of knew at that point it was. And I turned to my husband and I said, I think he's gone. And he's like, yeah. He's like, it was weird. He's like, I kind of felt something. And I'm like, yeah. It sounds cheesy, but yeah. He's like, I kind of felt something. I'm like, yeah, I think I did too. We just hope he's at peace. At that point, it just was weird because, I'm feeling my stomach. It's hard. He's in there, but, there's no life. Next morning, I had to wake up at 5. I took the pill. And my husband went down for breakfast. And that was the worst pain in my entire life I had ever felt. Once that pill kicked in, it was awful. Like, it wasn't just period cramps. I got so sick from it. I was vomiting. I was shaking really bad. I couldn't control the shakes. My husband didn't bring his phone with him. He didn't bring his phone to the lobby. And I had to crawl from the bed to the bathroom. And I sat in the bathroom in the tub after I threw up. I don't know, for a long time. He found me in the toilet, or not the toilet, in the bathtub, with the hot water spraying on my stomach. It was super painful. And he's like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm really, really sick. I don't feel good. Like, it's shaking. He picked me up and laid me on the bed, and he helped me get ready for the day. I did not react well. I know some other women are okay with it. I just didn't react well to it. Yeah. So then that morning we had to go back to the clinic, and they made me take more of that medicine, and I started getting sick again. And they finally got me in the back, and they're like, my husband's like, oh great, this poor portion. So we get the back, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, your husband can't come back here, when they called me back. And I'm like, what do you mean? They told me he could. And they're like, no, he's not allowed back. And I kind of, I start crying, and they're taking my blood pressure and everything. And then they realized that our case was different. They're like, oh, you're here because it's a wanted pregnancy. And they brought him back to sit with me in the pre-op. Yeah. They gave me an IV and some anxiety medicine, which really helped. I started feeling calm. I stopped getting super, super sick from that medicine. And my husband and I were just looking at old photos on our phone, just trying to kind of cheer ourselves up a little bit. And, we waited for a while. You could hear the girls going in before me, and you could hear that, they were scared or whatever feelings that they were feeling. I don't know their circumstances, but yeah. And you hear the DNA machine, the vacuum, and I tried to clear it out. Like, I tried to not think about it. I just wanted it to be done and over with. They started to wheel me back there, and the doctor's like, oh, you'll be the same doctor from the day before. She's like, you'll be okay. And well, we'll take care of you or something like that. And I kind of start crying right then and there. And they're like, oh, don't cry. You'll be okay. And I'm like, I'm climbing on the table and they're saying, I'm like, I'm not worried about me.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm worried about my son. And they didn't really know what to say to that. And I remember they're putting the mask and they'll be like, when you wake up, it'll all be over. And I'm like, no,
That's not comforting.
yeah, like that's not the case. And I'm like, at the same time, I just told them, I'm like, just take care of my son. Like, just please take care of him. um, and I just remember saying right before I fell asleep, I'm like, I love you. And I'm so sorry. And then, I woke up, like it was a blink of an eye. I woke up and he was no longer in me. My stomach was flat. My husband, they had told him it was probably going to take half an hour, a little bit longer. So he had just left and he got to a coffee shop like around the corner and they called him and they're like, oh yeah, your wife's awake. And he's like, already? I haven't even gotten my coffee yet. I haven't even gotten my bagel yet. They're like, yeah, she did really well. She comes out of anesthesia really well. Like the first words out of my mouth we're like, are they okay? Like, is everyone okay? And the nurse is like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, the staff, are they okay? Like, I was worried for them. Like, I wasn't even worried for me. And she's like, yeah, and your husband's on the way too, and he's okay. And I'm like, okay, so everyone's okay. And I'm like, okay, where are my son's handprints and footprints? And they're like, they're right here. They were only able to get his footprints and his left hand. They couldn't get his right hand. Realistically, I know why, but I like to tell myself it's because he like had his hand clenched or something like that, or he was like sucking his thumb. It's a better thought than the ulterior. Or alternative, I should say. No. And that was it. Like, I felt really good. They got me really good pain meds. My husband's like, well, if you're feeling up to it, do you want to go to IKEA for some Swedish meatballs? And I'm like, let's do it. Yeah, like let's go. Like I was high off of pain meds. And my husband asked the doctor, how was it? Like, can you tell us, like, is the baby, was it as bad? She changed her demeanor. She's like, I am so sorry. She's like, she's like, yeah, it was bad. And she's like, yeah, it's even worse than like the ultrasound had shown. And my husband's like, you're not just saying that just to make us feel better. And she's like, yeah, I'm not. It was really bad. He was really sick. He was very, very sick. And she's like, I think you guys did the right thing. She's like, I work with these kinds of things, cases all day, every day. She's like, I think you made the right decision. So that made me feel better. And she also said something before I left, something to my husband and me. Mm-hmm. It was like I said, she totally changed her demeanor. It was like she didn't believe us, and then she saw how sick our son was herself. But she said, and this is important for anyone that's listening or still listening, if you made it this far, thank you. She said, some parents just have a different threshold of dealing with these types of things. And not parents, just even people. She's like, some people have a really high threshold, and some people just have a really low threshold. And my husband and I agree. We're both very low on the threshold scale. We don't deal well with that kind of stuff. Our stress levels we just don't handle stress very well. My husband's a state trooper. I'm a 911 dispatcher. We handle enough stress in our day-to-day life with our work and with our family, let alone a disabled kid. That really resonated with us. And we knew we made the right decision, especially when she said it was worse than what the ultrasound photo showed. And then I was like, hey, there's this great bookstore in town. I've been there once before. It's called Powell's City of Books, and it's a 4-story bookstore. And I'm like, I want to go there. Like, I bet they'll have a book there about women in our situation. We went to Powell's City of Books, and this place was freaking amazing. And sure enough, they did. They had a book there. Yeah, they had a book there, and it was like Our Heartbreaking Choices or something like that.
That's a good one. I'll put that in the description.
Yeah, please do. I still have my copy, and I think it's almost at the time where I'm probably ready to give it to someone else who may need it. Mm-hmm. I needed to read stories of other people like me I've always been a book reader, avid book reader. I love books. I grew up loving books. So having that connection was really helpful for me. So I'm like walking around this bookstore, you know, I'm bleeding. Like, but I just didn't care. Like I had that book. I found that book and I devoured it. Like that whole after I returned home, I read it starting that night and I devoured it. It took me about a day to get through everyone's stories, maybe 2 days. And it was so helpful. And I gave it to my mother-in-law and she read it and she found it super helpful for her. But for me, I needed to see those stories and I needed to find that there was hope at the end. You know, I know some people can't go on to have a healthy pregnancy. Others do, you know, and I needed to know that there was a possibility for us to go on to have a healthy pregnancy. Um, so yeah, that was our experience in Portland. And then the next morning we flew out, and at that point, it was just I was waiting to get my son's ashes back. The guy at the funeral home was just so kind. He was so kind, talking to us and apologizing to us. And he said, "There, you know, it's because of families like you that I do this for a very low fee." On the fireplace mantle, it's a little tin box with flowers on it. It's so small, but it's with our family photos.
And then in the months after?
So I bled about for 4 weeks after the procedure. And I know a lot of women have the question of, when am I going to start my period? How do I know if this is my period? You'll just know. I hated that answer because I looked that up like crazy. You'll just know it's your period. I promise. So I bled about for 4 weeks. And then I stopped bleeding for a week. And then I started my period. And thankfully, I had no issues with retained tissue or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know some women have trouble with that. I wanted to get back on the bandwagon of trying to conceive. In my mind, I felt like I could properly be healed if I conceived before my son's due date, which was in November. And it wasn't just a want, it was like a need. I needed to be pregnant before then. I realize now that it wasn't meant to be, and it probably was good that I didn't. Because it really was like a way, like when my son's due date came up and I wasn't pregnant, I really had to accept that he was gone.
Yeah, well, it gave you that space.
Exactly.
To do the grief work.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, I actually felt okay. Like my doctor, or most people say you have to wait 3 months to try to conceive again. In our
case,
it
depends.
Yeah, exactly. It depends.
Every case and every doctor.
Right, exactly. And we did the research, and my mom is, well, I call her my mom. She's my cousin. She took guardianship of me after my dad passed away until I was 18. It's just easier to call her my mom. So anyone that's listening, like, I thought her mom died. Yes, my real mom died, but my cousin, who was much older than me, like 20 years older than me, stepped up to the plate and adopted me, essentially. But after consulting with my doctor, she said that, yeah, the 3 months is mainly for emotional, to give yourself time to heal emotionally. But that the human body, especially women, is very durable and heals incredibly quickly. There's a reason why, like, they tell you not to have sex after you give birth for like at least a month. You know, because
your fertility
is through the
comes
roof.
Right back. Yeah,
right, exactly. Like, I actually got on a high dose of folate as soon as we got the diagnosis with my son. It wasn't going to fix him. Maybe in my mind I thought it could fix him. It wasn't going to, though. It's too late at that point. I got on it anyway, and I stayed on my prenatals the whole time. After losing George, we decided to try to take a little bit more of a natural approach in taking better care of my body. So I got the natural form, which was methylfolate 5,000. When they did start putting it in our food, neural tube defects went down dramatically in the United States. So it's not a bad thing, but there's like mutations called the MTHFR gene, where the gene may not be able to process the synthetic kind. And so there's not a ton of research done, but there is research out there. And it shows that if they can't process the the synthetic kind, which is folic acid, that you're basically not getting any of that in your diet. So I wanted to do the natural kind because A, it's natural. B, my body can, synthesize it just fine. Doctor's like, yeah, after you get your first period, go ahead, try to conceive if you're ready. I'm like, okay, let's do this.
So how long did it take until you were pregnant again?
I found out I was pregnant with my rainbow in January of 2019.
And your
so
termination was
July. So August, September, October, November, December, essentially. And let me tell you, ladies, husbands will love it. I was all over my husband. He was all over that. But keep in mind, men do grieve differently, and they may not be up for it. My husband was all up for it because for him, it wasn't only trying to conceive, but he was getting that bonding back with his wife. I fully believe that our marriage is so much stronger because of what we went through, and that isn't always the case.
So then you went through your sub-pregnancy.
That was an experience. Because you're going to go through the stages of what the hell did I do wrong to cause this? You're wondering, okay, like, what am I putting into my body? I literally was so crazy. Like, my dad had to bring me down from like the ledge because I'd be like, well, maybe coffee caused it. Like, maybe I drank too much coffee, or maybe the Zofran caused it because you're not supposed to give it to pregnant women. Like, I just went crazy with the maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. Like, what if? So I kind of went on a crazy health kick. And my husband was all over for that because he's like super into vitamins and all of that. And I never was. So you're going to question, and you'll never figure out why. Like, I don't know why. I don't know if I have I don't know. Yeah. I really don't know why. It happened. There's no case of it in my family or his family. It happened. And I know I'm not to blame. I struggled with that for a long time. I blamed myself and my body for not giving my son a healthy body. We found out we were pregnant. We were in Vegas. We were going to see the Vegas Golden Knights. We're walking on the strip, and I remember Googling like Mexican places, and there are like no Mexican places on the strip. My husband was thinking I was crazy, like trying to find this Mexican joint, and I kind of knew. I'm like, I bet I'm pregnant. I bet I am freaking pregnant. So weird. Like, he's laughing now because I hid it from him. I bought a pregnancy test on the strip at a CVS. Like, I was laughing about it at the time. And I still laugh about it, but like, I'm sure the lady was like, what the hell are you doing buying? Like, it's just so trashy, like I snuck away and I bought it and I hid it in my hoodie pocket. We went to the Mandalay Bay. We went there, and he played craps, and he bet only once, and he put $20 down and he won double. And I go in the bathroom, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, how terrible would this be if I am pregnant? Like, this is such a trashy place. I'm in the Mandalay Bay bathroom. I saw it go, and I immediately saw the second line, and I'm like, it was different. Like, I felt excited. Like, I felt happy about this, and I was scared. I was scared shitless, but I was excited. I was like, okay, here we go. Like, this is it. I came out of the bathroom, and my husband's waiting for me, and I go up to him, and I'm like, are you feeling lucky? And he's like, well, yeah, I just won $40. Like,
are you feeling lucky?
He's like, let's go grab something to eat. And I'm like, no, like, are you really feeling lucky? And he's kind of looking at me, and he's like, do you want to go back to the hotel? And I'm like, how lucky are you feeling? He's like, well, like, he doesn't know where I'm going with this. And he's like, pretty lucky, I guess. And I'm like, I hold up the test, and I'm like, how about this kind of lucky? He's like, really? And he like looked, and he hugged me. He's like, this is so exciting. Let's go celebrate. Like, let's go get dinner. So that's how we found out we were pregnant, was my rainbow. It was scary the whole time because I was like, okay, well, what if I don't get spina bifida, but I'm given down? I lose amniotic fluid. Like, yeah, it was so stressful. Yeah. And I tried not to be stressed, but it was hard.
I know that in my subsequent pregnancy after loss, I had to mute lots of groups.
Yes.
So I stayed in the group,
Yes.
But I wasn't in there reading all of
Right.
the disaster stories during
Exactly.
that period of time. So
Exactly.
it's a good self-care
Exactly.
thing that you can do
Right.
at any point if you
And
need
that's
to.
what I did. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, what I ended up doing. I unfollowed the group. The doctor, the same doctor, was with me through every step of the way. She was so excited for me. She went on to tell me that she's had 3 patients where she has spina bifida diagnosis, but they went on to have healthy pregnancies. And I was the third. At the time, she only had 2, so I was the third one. So that was, hopeful for me. She did extra ultrasounds for me, listened to baby's heartbeat extra. We got our anatomy scan. We set it up as earliest as can be, which was about 18 weeks at maternal fetal medicine. I had my AFP test, which wasn't offered to me the first time around, and that is the alpha beta protein. And that came back all clear before our anatomy scan, so that was a huge relief. Yeah, and we got the anatomy scan, and everything looked great.
Yeah, it's like getting over that milestone.
Yeah.
Is a big
so
one.
Huge. It was
where
huge.
Wherever you had the loss or the poor prenatal diagnosis beforehand, then you can, I don't know, finally hope.
Yeah, after I got that scan, I did start to hope and start to feel positive and want to plan. And I was still scared shit to plan, but that's when we announced. When we got the all clear scan, we announced we were pregnant. Our family knew, our immediate family knew, but no one else. The diabetes test, I passed a 1 hour, barely. And I guess my sugar levels or something was really high during one of the times. So I had to do the 3-hour glucose test, which came back fine. At one point, I did have a little bit too much amniotic fluid, so they were keeping an eye on that. He scared us a few times. He wasn't passing non-stress tests very well. And when I gave birth to him, there was meconium. That was kind of the reason for the lack of the fluctuations in his heart rate. But other than that, he's been perfectly healthy since. Yeah, he's going to be 11 months old this month, and he's relatively healthy. Yeah, so he's healthy. He's happy. He's a good baby. So yeah, it's stressful being a real first time parent, but yeah.
What would be something that you would tell someone who's recently gone through a termination for medical reasons?
Okay, so it was hard. It's hard, sometimes because I see him meeting all these wonderful milestones that George will never meet. So I celebrate his milestones, but I also grieve for the ones that George didn't make. I also am sad too. It's a bittersweet type of thing because we lost. If it weren't for George, we wouldn't have Jamie. So that was really hard for me. That's been really hard for me to accept because I'm trying to appreciate this amazing little miracle, and but I'm also mourning for my son that isn't here with us. So it's been difficult. This past year, or past July, was 2 years, and it was really hard for me this time around. Last year it wasn't that hard. I think it was because I was pregnant and I had so much going on at the time. This year I really struggled and I cried a lot. And that's how the grief is. It's going to come and go in waves. Expect that. Parenting isn't a breeze, especially for someone who's gone through this, what we've gone through. It's a lot harder. You have a lot of different thoughts along the way. Don't be ashamed about them. Give yourself time to grieve. It's okay to grieve while you're celebrating milestones. You do, I view it, you do have two, like for me, I do have 2 children. One's just not here. So allow yourself to grieve. It's going to come and go. Most days are pretty easy for me. Yeah, most days are easy. It gets better over time. Maybe not better, but easier, I guess, over time. After we lost George, my whole world stopped and I just didn't care about anyone or anything. It took a little over a year for me to start caring about other people again and to care about my normal hobbies and interests. It took a while. So give yourself time. And then when you are ready to involve yourself into that stuff, do it, because it's so helpful at healing to be able to realize that your life continues on, and live your life for your lost baby, that because they couldn't get a chance to live it, do everything you can for them, in memory and honor of them. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Kelsie. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for
and
listening. Sorry it's long.
yeah, that's okay.
So I'll have to
I
update the blog too, especially
oh,
now
okay.
with my rainbow. I'll have to definitely do that. It's just something I haven't really thought about, but it probably would be helpful to document my thoughts and feelings and the sub-pregnancy. So for people who are ready to hear, because it's hard to hear when you're going through that, other people having healthy babies. And I totally understand that, and I respect that 100%, because I hated anyone and everyone that would go on to have a healthy pregnancy, until it was me.
Yeah, so I will link your blog here
Okay.
in the description box, and
Okay.
so all of you can follow along with Kelsie, or read the blog post that she has from when she was going through the termination
Yeah.
for medical reasons.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
about
Thank you.
the celebrating and grieving at the same
Yes.
time, and
Yep.
that's okay.
Yep. It is. It's
Yeah.
100% okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelsie, for
Yeah.
sharing
All
so
right.
deeply about your
Yeah. Thank
story.
you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Sabrina. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I would also love to hear from you. Would you like to share your story of termination for medical reasons on our TFMR stories? If you would like to, I will put my contact information here in the description box below. If you would rather process your loss in a more private way, I also have some free journaling prompts that you can pick up, and that will be in the description box as well. Today's episode has been sponsored by my new one-on-one service, a bereavement care package. And you can find out more about those services, pregnancy loss doula support for you as a bereaved parent, also in the description box below. I release these stories weekly. Make sure to subscribe so that you can see each new one, and I'll see you again soon.